Morning. I'm Tim Drury with Bliss McKnight. We insure local governments. Christine and I were just talking. I've been with Bliss McKnight for 21 years. So we have seen a lot of things in terms of employment issues from defending you guys and local governments. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be specifically the things that cause you legal trouble. Kent can talk about legal trouble too, but he's also kind of the expert on FSLA and that type of stuff. So keep your, think about those questions that you can throw at him. I had originally said 10 myths debunked, and I kind of went through them, and I pared it down to 8, but some of mine are, there's an A, a B, and a C, so it could be more, but I tried to put them in families. Let's just go ahead and get started. So we're going to play a little bit of Mythbusters. Yeah, I stole their logo, but I'm not selling this, so I don't think they're going to be really mad. I was thinking about starting the program off by dropping a whole bunch of Mentos into a big 2-liter bottle of Diet Mountain Dew, just having a fountain, and then you'd all wake up, but no, it's fine. So what is the issue that you face? From our experience, what I see is that it's difficult for you to keep current with all the different laws that are out there, just talking about employment issues. I mean, think of all the other things that are on your plate, and then you throw employment in there too, and it's just too difficult to stay abreast of that. And then you have to look at the things that change, like the ADA. They passed the ADA Amendments Act, so now it's like the ADAAA in 3D. It's like spookier than ever, and it comes right out at you. And then the FMLA got expanded. So it's even when you are current with laws, there's case laws and there's other stuff, and it's very easy to get tripped up. So for folks like you guys, and if you don't have HR professionals, and you're here possibly because HR falls into your hat, then that's even harder for you to stay current. So, myth number 1. Indiana is an at-will employment state, so we can fire anyone we want for any reason we want. That's kind of true. Just went to an employment seminar where the attorney started off with kind of a flow chart. We're an at-will state. Here's this. But then we have to take out protected classes. We have to take out anybody who might have disabilities and contractual issues, and we're down to nobody. And that's kind of the landscape that we face in Indiana. You can terminate anyone for any reason you want, as long as the reason is not specifically illegal. That's where it gets a little bit dicey. But it doesn't mean you can do anything you want. Oftentimes you might even do something that seems to have fallen in the legal realm, but it can be perceived as illegal. And so now it's going to be difficult for you to fight your way towards proving that you didn't terminate someone for an illegal reason. So what I want to do is give an example. I've got handouts over here, but one of the things that I've got, I know this is not the time of year, but one of the things we have is an educational piece called You Got Elected, Now What? And it talks about the issues with employment practices. When you come into office, I'll stand up here. When you come into office as a newly elected official, can you clean house? There are some actual limits, legal limits on the types of ways that you can clean house. For instance, you can't come in and just fire everybody. It's kind of a shock sometimes. What we find insuring our local governments and our counties is that a new county official comes in and they say, yep, out with the old and in with the new. And then the very first thing we know, we're in, the very first thing that public official is doing is going to court. So I'm going to leave these up front. This walks you through the specifics of the ways in which you can, the types of employees that you can discharge. But the reality is, public officials and public employees are different than private employees. So if you come from a private employee background, often that can confuse the issue, and you think, well, I can fire people, but you can't. Public employees have actually a property right interest in their jobs. And so before those types of employees can be let go, you have to do things like have due process. So there's specific ways that those employees can be terminated.
Doesn't the home rule come into effect there, or if political? I mean, we had the same scenario, just what you said. New commissioner on board this past January, and he got the other commissioner to buy in with him, and so he fired the number 2 guy, demoted him, and put his own guy in there. The other guy, no write-ups, nothing wrong with him. He wanted to multiply this guy, but because it's political or home rule 2 to 1, we do whatever we want.
And often you can do that. One of the things that you can is if that employee is in a policy-making position. So if I'm the sheriff and I have a chief deputy, I can fire that chief deputy because they're a policy-making position. So I'm coming in, so I'm going to set up a new regime. So it's logical that I will make new policies, and I need people to carry out my rules. So if they're in a policy-making position. But if you come in a lot of times and you clean house completely, you're firing people that are not in policy-making positions, obviously. So if this number 2 person was like an administrator,
Highway, second, number 2 at the highway department.
and just now keep in mind though, hang on, you can fire people for any reason. So as long as it's not an illegal reason, you can fire someone because you don't like the color of their eyes, you don't like the how tall they are, how short they are, because those are not protected classes yet. I could turn that into a disability, and so you couldn't fire me anyway. So I'm going to leave these up here for you. How many folks are fairly new to being in public office? Okay, just not a lot.
2 years?
2 years. Yeah, you're around the block already. I'm going to leave these up front, so if you want to take these, go ahead and do that. The main issue that we see when we're looking at terminating employees is lack of documentation. Because often you're going to be looking at ways to justify the decisions that you made, not from the standpoint of that you did something wrong, but to verify that you didn't do something wrong. You almost have to think backwards. Because employees are going to be, ex-employees are going to be looking at ways to come back at you for monetary damages. So they're going to be saying things like, you know, you fired me for an illegal reason. So if I'm over 40, I can say it was an age discrimination. If I'm a minority, it was race discrimination. So we know the legally protected classes. Those are, if you fire somebody, they're likely will fall into those type of protected classes. Here's one that we run into. The employee is still in his probationary period at the beginning of employment. Let's just fire him. How many of you use probationary periods? Yeah. There's actually no legal reason for you to have a probationary period. You're actually creating I have a handout on probationary periods. You're creating a right that doesn't need to exist. As employers, you don't need to give an additional barrier to yourself to hire or fire an employee. So when you are saying we have a probationary period, you are creating, arguably, a contractual time period in which you're giving that employee a chance to learn, correct? So now terminating them is you're making it seem like it has to be for cause, right? You're saying it's a probationary period, so there's no reason to do that. A lot of people start off with a personnel policy that says we're an at-will employer and we can fire at any time and you're free to go at any time. And then we throw things into our personnel policy that kind of tie our hands up. And probationary period would be one of them. Yes?
Would you recommend it taken out?
Yeah.
Of the policy?
Just throw it on out. Kent Irwin, do you put probationary periods in your policies? I thought for sure you were going to back me up on that one.
Is there a different pay structure though?
If you have a different pay structure, then just put that into your. If you want to have a different pay structure for length of service, you can build that in. Yes.
You got some people like American police officers, they're on probation for one thing, until they get to the academy. So there are certain.
Okay. All right. Don't create it if you don't need to, right?
You could also call it like an administrative review period where you're evaluating the employee.
Then keep in mind that you need, if you say you're doing something, then you ought to do it. Then you ought to be documenting what you're saying you're going to do. So if you have an administrative review, actually have some documentation there. So I talked about how sometimes in personnel policies, we have this at-will thing and then we throw stuff in that doesn't need to be there. Let me give you an example. This is from a county's personnel manual. They terminated an employee and they all felt good about it. And the employee came back and said, wait a minute, where's my grievance hearing? Because even though this is a non-union employee, the county years ago threw into their manual a statement, and I'll just read, goes on for a number of things, but all employees have a right to appeal a termination notice to the grievance committee. The committee will consider the appeal at a time set by the committee and will submit its determination in writing to the employee. So we had a county board chair who let go a finance director and then said, well, I don't want to do that. If it's in your policy, you better do it, or you're going to have legal issues. You're not following your own policy manual. What had happened, they think, because no one can remember when this came down from the mountain, it was so long ago, they think what they did is took the union contract of some kind and just inserted that language in there and said, well, if we're going to do it for them, why don't we do it for these guys? Well, because you don't need to. Unions are bargaining for these rights, and if they bargain and they get them, that's all well and good, but you don't need to give more rights to employees. As an employer, you want the rights to terminate in the ways that you choose to, as long as they're not illegal. So they did end up, it was interesting, and the chairman said, we said, so what will happen if the grievance committee says this employee ought to stay? There ought to be other disciplinary action. And he goes, that employee's never coming back here again. Okay, so you certainly don't want, so now you have a grievance committee that better agree with you. And if they don't agree with you, we're going to have trouble. As it turned out, the grievance committee voted 4 in favor of termination and 1 voted in favor of not terminating. But how ridiculous was that the decision to terminate was going to be left to other employees within the county? And there was, of course, no stipulation as to how you get on the grievance committee, when it's formed, how it's active, what it does. Kind of ridiculous. Those are the types of things that you ought to be looking for in your personnel policy manual. I have an example. I have some language about a probationary period that we found in a personnel manual. It's just the type of thing, as Ken said, there might be some situations where you need to have it. But if you don't, evaluate why you have it and evaluate whether it's useful for you. But the more opportunities we have to defend you in your decisions, in your employment decisions, the better it is for you. So we're looking for broader rights and more rights for the county as an employer. I'm not anti-employee, I am an employee. I'm just saying on what we're finding in defending our insureds is that it's not a benefit to you to have that type of language in there. And it's often superfluous anyway, because what are you doing with it? Yeah, we just feel it misleads employees, it misleads supervisors. Everybody thinks it's a safe period. Yes?
You use the probationary period for, you can't take sick or vacation, and during that period, you can't, you don't qualify for health insurance,
Yeah, one of the things you might consider is calling it an introductory period and saying that benefits, various benefits will not begin until after X amount of time. Because if that's what you really mean by it, then go right ahead. This is an issue that we run into from time to time. And it often happens when we have people who come from a private sector background into the public sector. They'll say, in order to have a safer working environment, we're going to have random drug testing for all employees. Big difference between public sector and private sector. Random drug testing for all employees is actually prohibited. You can do random drug testing for employees in safety-sensitive positions. And you're going to say, Tim, what are safety-sensitive positions? Let me get a handout for the person who just walked in. And of course, I have a handout on random drug testing. Who you think? Oftentimes, when things are defined, they're defined by attorneys. And so we have to go back to attorneys and have them assess, well, what does that mean? There's lots of examples of what are safety-sensitive positions. Courts have upheld random drug testing for employees in highway, rail, and water transportation industries, forklift operators, tractor operators, engineer operators, crane operators, correctional officers, based on their regular contact with potential violent prisoners and dangers of smuggling. So I would suggest that before you institute a county-wide random drug testing program, you get some legal advice, maybe take a gander at the court cases. The federal court cases in the Seventh Circuit Court that we're in, they've given a lot of guidance on the areas where you can do random drug testing. Keep in mind that your CDL operators should already be part of a random drug testing pool. So that should be taken care of, that should be covered. So those folks that are required to participate in a random drug testing pool ought to look into that. We haven't really found any places where that's not taking place, though. When that first law was passed, people were like, oh no, we have to get into this, we have to join this consortium and be involved in random drug testing. That doesn't seem to be a problem anymore. We don't really see a lot of highway departments that are having compliance issues with that. It's the exact opposite. We're seeing somebody saying we want to do random drug testing for all of our employees, and that's just not going to fly. Yes? No.
I'm from a treasurer's office, and we have lots of money, and there's been lots of issues going on in other employees. But a few years ago, the treasurer's office actually had a person going out and smoking weed during county hours. They say we can't do drug testing. I would love drug testing, credit checking, the whole 9 yards for the treasurer's office because we need it now. I just think
No, notice I'm saying random drug testing. How would you handle it if an employee was drinking alcohol on the job? Drugs ought to be no difference. One of the things that we would probably counsel you is to stay away from prescribing what it is that they're doing. Look at employment issues and performance issues. Employee appears to have glassy-eyed, they're not meeting our deadlines, there's attendance issues, slurred speech. Those are the types of things that we talk about if you're looking at how are you going to discipline an employee, and somebody says, well, I know they're getting high on their lunch break, you don't need to follow them around.
Well, we didn't know it, that's
Ah.
how naive we were, we didn't know it. I seriously don't even know what it sounds like.
Oh.
So, and you have to know it. Legal drugs, I think, prescription drugs are saying legal.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I think you need to look at it from performance standards and go that same route, that their productivity is not where it's supposed to be. If you do want to look into, we do a class on, for CDL operators, the supervisors are supposed to be trained on how to detect drug use.
But if they're performing their job well, that's not gonna stop them from stealing if they've got a meth addiction. And the stealing is, like you said, you need money, you're facing thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Every day. So, job performance, yeah, we wait till they steal it.
Yeah. Well, that's, Indiana's looking at mandatory ethics training for a number of employers, for public employees and public officials. I don't really know how well that's going to work out real well. I'm from Illinois, and so we're every governor we have goes to jail. And we've got one of the rising stars in the Republican Party just resigned because his Downton Abbey office and his 120,000 miles that he charged the state in his brand new vehicle that only had 80,000 miles. I don't really, so we talk about this, and I don't know. I don't know if ethics training teaches people not to steal. I think I taught my kids that when they were 4 years old. So I think in those situations, you have to look at protocols and things that double and triple opportunities to not have people embezzling funds. I don't know. But I don't think that random drug testing is going to be the answer there, because it'll get you in more hot water. I think our personal policy has been reviewed some time ago. There's nothing in there that will trip us up. We could do an entire program, and I've seen programs on personnel policies, and they walk through every single policy that they think you ought to have. While a personnel policy is very important, it is your first line of defense. It is the document that could hurt you or help you. I already gave you my example of the county that had trouble firing because they had that grievance policy. We actually have an online program for our insureds, and it has a sample policy manual, sample handbook, and people can pull down sample policies, and they can do the whole handbook, or they can pull down sample policies. Oftentimes, when they're doing that, though, they're pulling things down piecemeal. So they're like, oh, I want a cell phone policy. I want this type of policy. I want that type of policy. And what you often end up with then is a kind of a Frankenstein cobbled together policy manual that doesn't work coherently together. A lot of times you pull a policy from a neighboring county, you grab something from somebody else. It really needs to reflect the way that your county operates, though. It needs to be relevant to how you do things. I encourage our insureds to use that service. I encourage them to pull down sample policies and procedures, but sometimes there's you can't have a policy on necessarily every little piece of thing. For instance, we've had phones for forever, and we've had people making personal phone calls for forever, and people could be on their phone for hours and not working on a personal phone call. Does it matter if they're on a cell phone making personal phone calls or a landline phone making personal phone calls? No, it shouldn't to you. From a performance standard, it doesn't matter what type of phone it is. So if you're instituting a cell phone policy, what's the purpose? What's the real reason that you're using it for? Are you saying that you don't want people using cell phones in their vehicles? So you have to think about what it is you're trying to accomplish when you pull a policy down or where you want to institute a policy. Well, if people say, oh, we need to have this policy or that policy because technology is moving, you still have performance standards. You still have ways to say, well, you can't be on the phone all day. You can't be standing by the water cooler all day. You don't need a water cooler policy. So oftentimes it's not necessarily the thing that you want a policy for, it's the behavior that you want a policy for. Does that make sense? But we have them. We have cell phone policies, we have social media policies, we've got them. I told you about the termination notice to the grievance committee. All right, so I have a couple of thoughts here on doing a self-audit. Things that you ought to think about when you're looking at your personnel manual, your employee manual, whatever it is that you call it. Does your handbook clearly states that it's not to be considered a contract in any way and you reserve the right to change it? If your handbook lists offenses warranting discipline, including discharge, does it make it clear that those listed are merely illustrative rather than exhaustive? If you put down the 4 things, no stealing, no this, no that, no that, and people go, well, I didn't do one of those 4 illegal things. I didn't do one of these, the 8 things you said not to do, so I'm okay. Make sure that you have that language in there. Do all employees receive copies of the handbook every time it's revised? If you are adding and revising to it, what do you do? How do you communicate that to everybody? This is a story from my own employment. We revised our vacation policy, and we were giving employees who had been there 15 or more years more vacation. But there was also some language that changed how you could get paid out for vacation time you weren't taking. So that's a revision that would affect everybody. The vacation policy was only distributed to employees who had been there 15 or more years. I'm like, well, that's not going to work because all employees now have a substantial change to their vacation policy. It used to be that if you didn't take a week of vacation, you could get paid for that week of vacation. But nobody was going to know that until the end of the year where they submitted a request to have pay for a week in lieu of their week of vacation. They were going to be told probably in December, nope, we're not doing that anymore. That was going to be a bad shocker. So even when you think you're doing things the right way and we were rolling this out, it was a policy that just should have gone to everybody. We shouldn't have different versions of policies floating around. New employees shouldn't get the newer handbook and older employees having the older handbook.
That's quite costly, so can you have an electronic version of it that they can go to?
That's a great way. Yeah, that is a great way to go. Another way is, you could do the binder thing where you could do a revision sheet, say that was revised, they could put the new version in, and the old version would be gone. There's actually, there are companies that put their policies, there are companies that will put your policy up for you, but I don't think you need to get that all confusing.
Does putting our handbook online, and that way, when we push stuff out, we push it out by email, and then, the handbook online, or printing it, I'm assuming that still needs to have required.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way, the updated version of the whole handbook.
Yeah. And as with anything, you want to be as uniform as you possibly can. We just ran into a situation that there was a discrepancy, that the online version wasn't up to date because somebody forgot to tell somebody in IT to put the new policy up on their website. So just something that simple, just an administrative thing, kind of mixed them up, and they had policy language that didn't. The hard copy was not, the online copy was not as current as the one that they were distributing, the paper version.
And we don't distribute paper at all, we just do straight online.
Yeah.
So I guess that would get around that.
Yeah. as with anything, you want everything to be, all the policies need to be concurrent. Do you have a receipt form that employees sign when they receive the handbook or any revisions? We had a situation where a county had revised their handbook, and they came back and said, well, none of the employees want to sign this form acknowledging that they got it. We said, well, that's kind of the tail wagging the dog, isn't it? They're not signing that they like it or that they helped write it. It's just a receipt saying that they received it. Well, put a note and say they wouldn't sign the receipt. And think about that in terms of performances. I bet those are not your employees that are the high producers. They're probably your problem children anyway.
What happens if you get one that signed the acknowledgement form, but when you have an issue come up, they inform you they didn't read it?
Yeah,
It was read to them.
Yeah.
it wasn't read to them. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, we get to keep the guy because we didn't read it to him.
No. Did he have a?
Two commissioners decided, well, since we didn't read it to him, we can't.
Well, that was. I think you needed some
New commissioners?
legal advice. No. And is your handbook up to date in all areas? Take a look at your handbook. Do you have a way to review your handbook every now and again? How is that done? As I said, remember the ADA changed, FMLA changed. So you may have had a policy manual that was up to date, and now it's not up to date. Do you have an attorney review your handbook regularly to see it contains nothing that conflicts with federal and state or local laws? And this is an interesting one. Is it written clearly and simply? We have this online handbook, and you can pull policies off of that. What's funny is that every policy comes in more than one version. There's English, there's Spanish, and then there's simple language. What's interesting is, why wouldn't you want it to be simple, just so you understand it? A lot of times it's not just the employee that has to discern what it is that policy truly is trying to say, but if it needs to be clear so that everybody understands it. Anyone can do the interview. Nothing can go wrong there. Oh, that's a terrible myth. So I'm going to tell you a story. This is in Indiana County, and the commissioner was doing the interview for, I don't even know the job position. I can't recall the job position. There were a number of qualified applicants. That was a great thing. One of the qualified applicants had retired from a previous job. No, okay. He had retired from a previous position, very qualified. Didn't take a genius to figure out that he was an older person. So the commissioner says, how long will you work? How long do you plan on working? During the interview. Gets a satisfactory answer, they move on. When they made the decision to hire, they didn't hire that previously retired applicant. The previous retired applicant said, hey, you didn't hire me only because of my age. And in fact, he raised the question, did you ask every employee, every applicant, how long do you plan on working? You could have hired a 30-year-old that was going to be moving, or there were many people who you might have been asking that question. So the very fact that you didn't ask the same questions to all the applicants definitely raised the red flag that there was an age bias during that interview. This commissioner had no concept that he needed to avoid certain types of questioning. He had never been involved in interviewing before. He didn't have a set of prearranged questions. He didn't have any assistance in how to document the questions. The horror stories we could tell you about people who make notes. We say, yes, you should make notes during interviews and ask the same questions, and then people write things like too old, too fat, too young, bad teeth, comments that are not appropriate to be documenting, and comments that are not related to their ability to perform the job. We may make prejudicial decisions in our head, or we look at people and we say he's wearing glasses, his vision's bad, he's gray hair, he's old, he's overweight, he doesn't work out. But does that have anything to do with me being able to perform the functions of the job? Probably not. We did an educational bulletin based just on that, and it's called You Asked What? Avoiding Illegal Interview Questions. And originally there's this chart, and originally it had said how to change a illegal question to a legal question, and then people read that and they said, you're slimy because you're trying to teach people how to ask illegal questions in a legal way. And that was not my intent at all. My intent was to say if you feel that you need to ask certain questions, they ought to be related to job performance. So rather than asking someone, where were your parents born, you can say, are you authorized to work in the United States? Because it doesn't matter what their nationality is. You just need to know if people are authorized to work in the United States. Instead of saying, how old are you? If there's a job requirement that that person be over the age of 18, you can say, are you over the age of 18? Don't ask things like, what's your marital status? Who do you live with? Do you plan to have a family? When? How many kids do you want to have? What are your child care arrangements? The appropriate questions that you could ask would be, this job requires overtime occasionally. Would you be able to work overtime? Are you willing to travel if necessary? Performance-related job questions. You don't need to be solving people's problems and say, who's going to take care of your 10 kids? You can say, hey, we have, oftentimes we have overtime during elections, and we're going to be working 7 days a week. Can you do that? Those are the types of questions. So the idea behind this chart was to be able to remind you what questions you can ask and how you ought to ask them. So if you have some issues with that, take a look at something like this. I would also suggest that you have a list of questions ahead of time. Try not to deviate from those questions. Try to ask all applicants the same types of questions. Anyone who interviews should have some familiarity with the legal issues of interviewing, because it can trip you up.
So, can I ask a question? Do you want to have a, I don't know what the right word, work one or some other agency to do the interviewing process? You know what I'm talking
Yeah, like you screen them through
about? Correct.
we actually, that's how my company actually brings people on, is through a third party. We bring them on as a temporary person first, pre-screened and all that, and put them in the workforce. I don't necessarily think you have to. We tend to be very conservative, but that would certainly be a solution. If you have someone I know county officials, you run your own kingdoms and nobody can tell you what to do. If you have someone in HR that can give you advice, if you have attorneys that can help you with that, that would be wonderful. This leads to this. How are you interviewing without job descriptions? Someday we'll have job descriptions for all our jobs. We don't really need them anyway. It's not a high priority. It's funny. So this attorney was doing this training program, and I hear this all the time as well, so that's why it made me laugh. When we go in as risk managers and we're working with one of our insureds, and we'll say things like, can we take a look at your personnel policy manual? 9 times out of 10, their first words are, well, we're revising it. I don't think I found anybody that isn't revising their personnel policy manual. You guys are laughing, right? Same thing with job descriptions. We say things like, do you have job descriptions? And they say, we're writing them. Wow. You know, how many years does it take to write a job description? But how are you interviewing? How are you looking at performance standards if you don't have a job description that describes what that person should be doing? So, number one, job descriptions are setting clear expectations for what you expect from the employee. They help you cover your legal bases, and they help in defending employment claims. I have another story. I have another handout and another story. Let me get to this.
When you get with the elected official versus the appointed official in job descriptions, you know, you can't discipline an elected official.
No.
Try to mentor.
Yeah. Very true. Here's where I think the job descriptions really get super important. When you're looking at job descriptions and ADA, one of the issues that we're looking at is we're seeing more claims and more issues related to ADA requirements. And one of the issues that trips up counties is the question of what's an essential job function. And then you don't have any job description at all. You don't have an essential job function, let alone any job functions. So now how are you deciding whether you can accommodate someone in their essential job functions when you don't even know what those essential job functions are? And the ADA will continue to be an issue for employers because as we have an aging population, folks who we don't think of as necessarily disabled are going to be legally disabled. For instance, before the ADA was expanded, someone on high blood pressure medicine was not considered disabled because as long as it could be controlled with an ameliorative thing, like glasses are ameliorative, I can't see you without them, I'm not considered disabled. With the ADAA, those folks are now considered disabled. The only exception in the ADAA for ameliorative effects was glasses. They specifically said folks with glasses were not disabled. But a cane, if you can walk with a cane, the cane is no longer considered an ameliorative effect. So that person is disabled. The blood pressure medicine, disabled. Brings me to my example, the snoring deputy. Sheriff's deputy came in and said, my doctor says I can't work the midnight shift. The doctor wrote this note and said he can't work midnights because he has obstructive sleep apnea and has a CPAP machine. So they had a nice job description. You know what the job description didn't say for sheriff's deputies? That they're required to work 24 hours a day. So was working at night an essential job function? In this particular situation, the department was big enough that there's a whole canon of law on this. The department was big enough that there could be people working at night, so it was deemed that working at night was not an essential job function because it could be done by other people. So this deputy didn't work nights. It raises a whole host of questions. We've seen situations where essential job functions have been deemed to not have said that regular attendance is an essential job function, that punctuality is not an essential job function. So you need to be thinking about those types of things in building a job description. And I have, if I can do this, a resource for you. There is the U.S. Department of Labor has this Career One Stop. I have it in your handouts. I have the website, but I just pulled up I did animal control workers in Indiana. Search. You put in the type of job that you're looking for. Oh, is he sleeping? And what you get is a bunch of, you can put in whatever job you want. I put in clerk, Indiana, and it gave me all these different types of clerk type positions. Municipal clerk was actually one of the categories, and I think that could work for counties as well. And it goes through a nice format, and you can edit this as you go through, or you can just say, review and download final job description, and away you go with a job description that talks about education and experience, the knowledge needed, the skills needed, the technical skills, the social skills. Some of the things that it does really well is what are the body positioning? So what are the physical requirements? The environment, are they working outside, lots of noise, cold, heat, job hazards, etc. The work setting, what it's required, the tasks. So you end up with what the government gives as a guidance on a nice job description. It is long, but you're able to edit and knock out stuff that you don't think is appropriate. I would suggest that if job descriptions are very, very difficult to write, you've got this resource where you can plug stuff in and just edit on your own. Yes?
So I come up with this new job description. I just need each of my employees that work in that area to sign that they have reviewed the new job descriptions and they agree that they can do those things or not agree.
I think I would look at it more as I would want dialogue and input from them because they might think of things that you did not think of, but I don't think you need to have your employees sign off on what it is that you want them to do. You are the employer.
Yes. However,
And the job description shouldn't be a surprise to them either, right? I mean, it ought to be reflective of what's actually being done on the job.
And the gentleman says he can't drive a standard truck. It has to be an automatic because he has sciatic nerve issues down the left leg.
Ha.
So therefore, you can't push the clutch in.
Oh my gosh, we are in ADA quagmire, aren't we? I mean, that's just an example
So I
of.
can't have him drive another truck to the line field because it's not an automatic, and therefore he's refusing to do a job.
I think you get into the whole, once an employee tells you that they can't do something, that's a request for an accommodation. It sounds like you're accommodating him in the ADA. Had your job description said that an essential job function was to drive a standard, then you would have been able to perhaps say that's an essential job function. But it does sound like in that particular instance, there were other vehicles that they could drive. So driving a standard would not be considered an essential job function anyway. So you're probably,
They need to buy a new truck.
don't let me. One of the issues in the ADA is that if the accommodation is unreasonable and too expensive, that as an employer you don't have to do that. But I think it's gonna be very difficult to say that buying a stick is gonna be more expensive than buying a standard. But it certainly speaks to the fact that it would be nice if you would have had these job descriptions before, but it certainly doesn't prevent you from doing it now. And you don't have to have an employee sign off on that job description. Yes.
On the job descriptions, do you recommend them to be real detailed or more vague? Because if
You know, you can always have that caveat at the end that says, plus anything else we tell you to do. But I think,
yeah, if I have this job description and now all of a sudden something's added to that.
yeah.
it's like, well, that's not-
When I looked at these job descriptions that you can create and edit, they're very detailed. But you can knock things off. You know, it would say social, you know, must interact with these people, must interact with that. You know, very, very detailed. I think the areas where you really need to be detailed, though, is when you're talking about essential, what's the essential function of that job. And if you're doing it in general terms, you're doing it in general terms. I think that you ought to be thinking about the physical requirements of that job, though, as well. For instance, if the heaviest file that they need to move is 22 pounds, then you ought to say that the requirement is to lift at least 22 pounds occasionally, frequently, infrequently. You can Google stuff and find resources where it's kind of a checklist. What do they lift? How often do they do that? Is it sometimes, frequently, never? You know, or often, sometimes, frequently, never, that type of thing. And it'll help you put together if you want to cobble it together that way, you can do it that way as well. Use a checklist to find out what physical requirements there are of the job. I just think this is pretty dynamite here, though. You know, so if you put in animal control officer, it says animal control officer. If you put municipal clerk, you'll get a municipal clerk. So the excuse that you can't write a job description is gone because you have this awesome resource. How do I make this big again?
Down there in the lower right corner, a little.
That guy?
To the left, to the left,
Oh, to
a little left, more like a little
Oh.
screen.
oh, this one?
Yep.
Oh, good. Golly. Can they make it
That's your job
smaller?
description.
I know. Seeing is a essential job function. That is the website that I just went to. There's lots of resources on there on job descriptions. Training on harassment and discrimination only increases the chances our employees will sue us. I've actually heard that. Because we go out there and we do training on harassment and discrimination. It is kind of funny because we'll say we're doing a harassment and discrimination training. We're not training on how to do it. We're training on awareness and prevention. We just kind of leave those words off. Typically, we're seeing that training actually can make your workplace more enjoyable. Everybody understands what the parameters are. They understand what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And also helps your employees understand your policies as well as legal requirements, legal issues. And training can be the difference between losing a lawsuit and winning it. As an employer, you have one affirmative defense in sexual harassment cases. If an employee was aware of your policy for reporting harassment and they did not use those channels, the employer can say, even if you were harassing him, but he didn't tell us about it, there was no way for us to fix it. Now he quits and he's gone. He's going to be barred from any claim against the employer. All right? So you want your employees to know how they report harassment and discrimination. You can't always make people, right? We already know this. We can't make everybody behave properly, but we can take steps to eliminate that. So if you're harassing him, he comes to us while he works, he does it through the proper channels, we can now, as an employer, take steps to train you, separate the job duties, et cetera. We can take steps to make the workplace a better place. But if the employee doesn't use that, It's going to bar them from any claim against you as an employer. That's why it's important to do those types of training, to get out and say, here's our policy, everybody understands the policy, okay. You understand you have multiple reporting channels. If he reports to her, she should not be the only person to whom he can report harassment and discrimination. There needs to be other channels. I don't want to get into a whole big sexual harassment program. But we have not seen situations where we go out and train employers and all the employees on harassment and discrimination, and then the next day there's 20 harassment and discrimination charges. I guess if you went to a workplace where it was just so offensive and pervasive, then perhaps you could, but I would guess that those employees know if they're being harassed or discriminated. I doubt if we're training them on it if they're not familiar with it. I'm going to keep on with the harassment topic. We don't need to take this complaint of harassment seriously because there's a bunch of issues here, things that should not be, things that you need to be aware of. We heard it from a third party, not the victim. If it was really serious, the victim would have complained themselves. It doesn't matter what the source of your knowledge is. You is the employer. This gets tricky because sometimes there's the grapevine in your workplace, and you is somebody that knew it and they didn't tell anybody. So your supervisors, your managers, those types of people, they need to be alerted to the fact that if they have knowledge of a harassment or discrimination, they need to move it through the proper channels. Yeah.
What if the information comes in the way of an anonymous letter? How is it supposed to be investigated or looked into when it's anonymous?
I would say that you would still want to look into that.
They're watching you to see what you do.
Yeah. I mean, you still ought to run it through your channels. We've actually suggested that folks test their system and have a fake, say, okay, let's, employee A harassed employee B, what do we do? And kind of do a tabletop exercise with who do we talk to, how do we do that, how are we gonna run that? So this anonymous letter could be like your tabletop exercise. And I would act on it and document what your actions were. It doesn't give, one of the options you have often when somebody makes a complaint of harassment is you can separate people, do various things. So if you have an anonymous complaint, it's not going to give you an opportunity to really fix, it's tying your hands in effect. But there are some things that you can do to investigate. You can meet with the party that was the anonymous tip came in about, talk to other employees. It could be a tip-off that there's a bad work environment and a very bad actor.
And anonymous letters go to the commissioners. Their view on it is if they can't sign their name, they're not going to pay attention to it if there's something to look into, you should sign it. And I would wonder about that.
Yeah, I'd run it through your protocols. Because we run into that with, so the next one, the victim or witness begged us not to take any action and swore us to secrecy. You'll have to tell that employee, totally appreciate your desire for secrecy to the extent that we can. Your name does not need to come out here. But, if it's Joe and Judy that are working together and Judy's making the complaint against Joe, it's going to be pretty easy to tell that it was who it came from. But, there is no such thing as, this is an off-the-record complaint of harassment.
What if you take a step further and the complaint comes through the grapevine that it's an elected official harassment? Because you can't fire an elected official.
Again, one of the issues with wanting to know about harassment is that it gives you an opportunity to correct it. And if you take corrective action, it gives you an opportunity to eliminate the claim or reduce the claim. So an anonymous complaint doesn't give you a really great opportunity to fix that. You could still look into that. Maybe it does give you an opportunity to do sensitivity training with the elected official, raise the elected official's awareness that they could be opening the county's checkbook to somebody down the road, and big amounts.
And we did that, and we did it as a group of all elected officials, and they all looked at each other like, we don't know who this is for, and said, assumed it was not for them specifically.
So that could be a whole day lecture. I'd like to know when that lecture is, because you don't have the right answers how working with elected officials.
Well, elected officials they're not above the law. And so one of the things, I'm actually doing a training in accounting, and we're doing it countywide. And it's an issue that has come up. And it's the attorney for the county that is saying we need to do this training. And the elected officials are saying, yeah, I'm going to send all my people. But I don't need to come because I'm an elected official. And what the attorney for the county is explaining is that this is a resource for them, and that state and federal discrimination and harassment laws apply to everyone, and that the county is at risk from everybody. So they're trying to approach it from a resource that everybody can benefit from. But if you lead that horse to water and that horse says, I don't like water, I don't know what else you can do.
Do you think we're covered then, because we've done those, to some degree, I mean, obviously we're not.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't give up the ship and say, well, we're not going to do anything. If these elected officials are not going to listen to us discuss our state and federal requirements, I would continue on anyway. Oftentimes you'll have somebody who brings it to your attention, and then they say that they don't want to be involved at all. They want to refuse. That refusal can blunt your liability, but only if you try to remedy the situation. So even if I say, I know I brought it to your attention, now I wish I never did, now I don't want to be involved in anything. You can still, this kind of goes back to the anonymous thing, you can still take action to the extent that you can. You don't have to have your hands tied. In fact, you shouldn't have your hands tied. Keep in mind that one of the things that you're doing in this situation is perhaps if the claim already took place, you're now looking at reducing that exposure from that risk, right? We can't always eliminate it. Can't maybe keep people from harassing or discriminating, but you can have that affirmative defense. I don't want to get into all this. Okay, this is some bonus issues that we've run into. We use temporary employees to insulate ourselves from liability. That can help. It can also not help. If you take an employee and say, you know what, we don't want to employ you anymore, but we'd like to contract you to do this, but you're still telling them when, where, how, and why, they're probably not going to pass the sniff test on being an actual contracted employee. So think about what your goal is when you're insulating yourselves from liability. Like I told you, my company actually does. We bring people on through a temporary agency as a way of vetting that process, so it can work. This is an issue. Instead of telling the employee we're firing her for terrible job performance, let's spare her feelings and say it's because of the economy. You never know what the documentation is going to be down the road, if that employee is going to be able to claim that they were harassed, if they had an ADA issue, if they were a whistleblower, or whatever other protected class or thing they would fall into. Good documentation and real reasons are much better. Because you're going to get into a situation then if you do get called into a situation where you're now testifying that you let her go because she did terrible, and then they pull out the most recent performance appraisal and says, wonderful, 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 wonderful. She makes everybody's day a joy. I don't want to demoralize them. I don't want to demotivate them. Yeah. I think that we've run into this, but I know Kent's going to talk about this. We don't have any FMLA issues because we've never had anyone on FMLA. I've been to a program and Kent says if you've never had anyone on FMLA, you're doing it wrong. Oh. All right. I'm gonna finish up with an opportunity for you to get candy. Yeah, look at that. Oh, man. All right. Christine, can I have you be my candy person?
Stick there.
So I can't guarantee these are gonna make it.
No, you can handle it. You can handle it. We've done this before, and we throw the candy, but we don't need to do that. Okay, so
Guarantee I'm not gonna open one of these up.
I do have a couple of extras in there, just for you. So, this is kind of playing on the idea that personnel jeopardy, that it's a hazardous situation. So we're going to play a little bit of Jeopardy. So, in Jeopardy, we give you the answer, and you have to come up with the question. So we'll start with employment practices for 100. The answer is FSLA, Title VII, ADA, FMLA, ADEA. Give the
All the
answer.
areas- What are all the areas that we should be aware of?
What are employment laws your county must be familiar with and comply with too? Yes. Throw them some candy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there's giant Kit Kats, giant candy bars, Snickers. It's all the big stuff.
It's a good time.
Employment practices for 200. The answer is, they set clear expectations for employees, cover your legal bases, and can help you in defending employment claims. I'm looking for something a little bit different on that. Job descriptions. What can effective job descriptions do for your county? Job descriptions. And Christine's going to be the judge of whether you're right or, she's going to be the handy candor outer, so. The answer is, you can terminate someone for any reason as long as the reason is not specifically illegal. What does it mean that it is an at-will stay? Whoever said that, I'm not looking up. Good job. At-will is the word we're looking for. Employment practices for 500. The answer is a well-written personnel policy manual. Yes?
What is your first line of defense?
Oh, man, look at that. I like that. What is your first line of defense in protecting your county from employment practice claims? Okay, now you got the gist of it, so now you know. I'd like hiring and firing for 100, Alex. All employees have a right to appeal a termination notice to the grievance committee. Employees will be placed on permanent status after successfully completing the probationary period.
Two items that need to be pulled out of your policy book.
Yeah, what are statements in your policy manual that should be deleted or modified? There you go.
Give it to her.
They can be construed to change the at-will status of your employees. I went hiring and firing for 200. Oh, shoot. The answer is, the county has the right to change the personnel policy handbook at our discretion. The personnel handbook is not a contract, and any employee can be terminated by the county at any time for any reason. Kind of the corollary to that one. What are statements that should be in your policy manual? Policy statements should not be construed as establishing a contractual obligation. in the big money now. Having personnel policies are all we need to have to protect our county from employment practice claims. Oh, this is an easy one. What's false? What's BS? What is a recipe for disaster is what I say. There was actually one court case in the 7th District where the employer had an anti-discrimination policy, but they didn't do any educating with their employees. And the court actually said that it showed the employer's indifference to whether supervisors followed the policies. So it actually hung them. I mean, they were in trouble anyway. But the fact that they were completely indifferent was not good. Did somebody get candy on that? Did somebody get candy on that last one? Okay, okay. Wow, what am I doing? I may have, false. Interviews can result in employment claims. How about yeah? How about do interviews have little to no exposure to employment claims? True or false? Yeah, they do. Give her a piece of candy. That's a badly worded question. I must have been asleep when I wrote that one, or falling asleep. The answer is any involved in this activity should know the legal ways to proceed and how to be legal rather than illegal. I don't know if you'll connect this back to the question is, what risk management practice should be involved in interviewing? That's what we're looking for. Anybody involved in interviewing ought to know what they're doing, to some extent, right? The answer is yes, that is a problem, because it may provide documentation contrary to statements that the employee was not meeting performance standards. Pardon me? Yes. Review grade inflation. You know, when you bump up the reviews. It's funny where I work. We kind of have a term for review season. We do it annually, and everybody kind of is on their best behavior the 2 months before review time. You know, you want your boss to be going, you know, he is just working on all 8 cylinders. He's just wonderful. You want them to forget what you did all those other months a while back. The answer is yes, they should be taken seriously. Employees are obligated to respond and act once they have knowledge. Oh, I don't know who you're going to give it to. A whole bunch of people said the right answer. The question is, should all harassment claims be taken seriously? Yes. Maybe if you think you answered that question right, raise your hand, because there's extra candy in there. And this is our last one. We're going to end up with extra candy. So Christine, you're going to be eating candy. The answer is, it can make the workplace a more enjoyable place to work. It can help employees understand your policies as well as the legal requirements. It can help provide an affirmative defense to these claims. Training. I heard training over there. What can harassment training do for your workplace? Well, that concludes my personnel Jeopardy game. And I think we're kind of right on schedule. I've got handouts.